Everyone thinks I'm the human version of a bulldog. I am very straightforward, and when I take on something, people compare it to a bulldog's teeth on the throat. I don't give up, and I don't give up. I follow every action to its logical conclusion. Many people think that I am my mother's luckiest son in the world, when in fact I am simply always ready. In everything I do, I try to be as prepared as possible so that everything ends pleasantly for me. I'm more of a wolf in a bulldog's skin because I sniff everything from all angles to identify any weak points in a business or person. Never underestimate the value of research. Personally or professionally, I explore all available options before deciding on a course of action. This is one of the many reasons why I have a successful business. If I get a new supplier or a new client, I find out everything I can about them and don't take anything for granted. They may look good on paper, but if I dig deeper, I may find out that they are in the middle of a messy divorce where their company may be compromised, or perhaps they filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago in another state. Some may be involved in affairs with members of both sexes and not be particularly discreet or associate with people of questionable character, which could negatively affect their business, which in turn affects mine. I'm something of a venture capitalist, which could be called a form of legal usury if you wanted to put it in a bad way. I saved some money in my life and managed to increase it significantly by investing wisely in people I trusted. I'm not infallible. Some things don't work out, but my success rate is about 80%, so I can afford to take a loss and move on. It's often an experience that gives me a better understanding of the next deal. I am widely versatile and have my fingers in many things. I had a friend who was an amazing trainer with several degrees in physical therapy and sports medicine. She was very good at her job, but she had no business sense at all. When she approached me about starting her own business, I looked into it with my usual fanaticism and dragged her along. She learned a lot in a short time about how her industry works, and we eventually agreed that it was a viable opportunity, so I set it up. When I started, I owned 60%, but was not actively involved except in the business aspects, and each contract had a standard buyout option that allowed the minority owner to buy me out within 5 to 10 years. There was also a clause in the contract that if the business started to fail, I would step in, analyze the data, and decide whether to take over or close it down. I had to do this 3 times, and each time it was perceived as a personal insult. I invested in an ad agency early on, and it was very, very successful. They were approached by big players who wanted to buy them out and make them work for their organization. Bob Anjan called me for help, and we reviewed the offer. It was attractive, but I showed them that as their reputation grew, they could be bigger than the company trying to buy them out in 15 years. They turned down the offer, and it was very beneficial for me over the years. I still own 20% through a structured buyout program that will make it completely independent in 4 years. My usual practice was to use those I had worked with previously to help make my new investment successful. Bob developed an elaborate campaign for Jody's rehab clinic, and within 2 years it had become a franchise, and now has offices in every southern state and parts of the Midwest. I own a small portion of each because she insisted it makes her feel more secure. The man who put me on the path I was on was an old trader who liked to go undercover. Over the course of his life, he probably paid about 20% of the taxes he actually owed and got away with it. I wasn't that bold, and my deals were pretty straightforward and transparent. In addition, with the advent of computers, it has become much more difficult to hide anything from the taxman. This was the reason why Great-Uncle Harry avoided technology like the plague. There was a scandal at an accounting firm in my city. It turns out that no one was watching how they looked after other people's money, and they took advantage of this, appropriating $12 million for themselves. They got caught, and the owners went to jail. The money was never found. This interested me, so I bought the business for next to nothing. The old owners were desperate for money for lawyers, so they made no profit. I retained 3 junior accountants who were not involved and slowly grew the business. Their main job was to make sure that the companies I invested in were clean and to provide expert advice when it was needed, which was usually me. I changed the name, and the guys I hired were good, managed to get about 25% of their old clients back who weren't affected by the theft, so revenues started to grow pretty decently. I offered the three original accountants a buyout deal, which they happily accepted, 6% a year for 10 years. They still had 7 years left. By this time, I was 32 years old and fairly happy with all aspects of my life except one. I was lonely. I dated a lot, but never found the one. Uncle Harry's wife got tired of his numerous affairs and gave him hell during the divorce. She seemed to know a lot more about his business than he thought. When she finished with him, the tax office appeared on the doorstep. The only thing that kept him out of jail was me. It was a hair's breadth from prison, but he had to pay an estimated $214,000 in fines and taxes. If he could do this, he would be left alone for 3 years probation. He had money, but couldn't explain where it came from, so I lent it to him. It put me under a microscope, but my transparent methods worked. Harry paid me at a pre-agreed rate from his salary as one of my warehouse managers, plus twice as much under the table. By the end of the probationary period, he will pay me every last penny. My great-grandmother acted out of anger and pain, but it made me realize I needed to figure things out if I ever found a woman I loved enough to marry. The prenuptial agreement was clear, and I would have made sure that if either party cheated, the consequences would be quite severe. I even discussed this with my lawyer, and he laid the groundwork, the details of which will be worked out when the time comes. As an only child of parents who never had deep family connections, I felt mostly alone in the world. This made me really want to have a big family. I wanted at least 3 children, and if one of them came with the mother, I would consider that a bonus. I was young, good-looking, and had enough money to date at a high level. I've had 2 pretty serious relationships in my life. Some were going well, and she started hinting at commitment when I explained to her that she would have to sign a prenuptial agreement. She refused, saying that we were in love and would be together forever. When that didn't work, she turned into a shrewish woman of epic proportions. We just gradually drifted away from each other. 6 months later, she married a rising businessman from an old money family. 6 months later, they found themselves in divorce court, and she was trying to squeeze every penny out of him. She was partially successful, receiving almost all of what he had saved, but the family money was locked up in a trust, and she had no chance of getting it. He almost had to close his little company until I intervened. 3 years later, he was worth much more than when he was married, engaged to a very nice young woman with a child from a previous marriage who seemed to love him more than her mother, and they were choosing a house. I arranged this through one of the 2 real estate agencies in which I had interests. During the same time, his first wife married and divorced twice more, gaining very little from each failed marriage. I saw her one day at lunch, and she blamed me for all her problems. I just grinned. I'm not the cause of all your problems, darling, only the big ones. The rest is on you. It was nonsense, of course, but she believed it. I was frustrated in my search for love, so I retreated. Love crashed into me in the hallway of an advertising agency. I was a pretty big guy, and she was a fragile woman. I later learned that she was only 5 feet tall and weighed 90 pounds when we met. After I helped her up, admiring her legs, I apologized and introduced myself. Hi, I'm Roy. Nice to meet you. She restrained the harsh answer that was on her lips and looked at me more carefully. I smiled at her with my I mean no harm to you smile, and she sighed. I should have watched where I was going. Sorry. It's no big deal. Are you okay? As good as you can get after bouncing off a stone wall. Let me guess, do you train a lot? Frankly, I was in good shape thanks to Jody. She wrote out my menu and exercise schedule and frowned at me when I deviated from the course. I liked craft beers, though. Most of them were terrible because brewers made the most common mistake, thinking that a higher alcohol percentage meant a better beer. Many understood this, but some did not, and they could not resist. I funded my favorite brewer's startup after he let me try what he was making at home. At first he was afraid, but we guided him. Accountants kept an eye on his finances. The advertising guys ran a viral campaign, plus billboards and ads in local and state magazines. Its demand was higher than its production, but it was limited by fairly strict restrictions, the result of a powerful lobby sponsored by the big players. Some even tried to pass off part of their products as micro beer, but were quickly exposed. I was one of his focus groups, and his opinion meant a lot to me. I smiled at her. A little. I wouldn't say I'm a rock. She involuntarily rubbed her butt. The expression, knocked down, no longer seemed like just a phrase. That's exactly how it felt to me. It's so interesting to meet you, but I have to get back to work. We parted, and I wondered what she was doing. Jan told me she was a new employee, fresh out of college, with a master's degree and boundless enthusiasm. I saw her a few more times when I came to the office. When we exchanged names, we barely managed to stop ourselves from laughing. My name was Roy McCoy and her Jimmy Choo. No relation, she said, and I don't think his shoes are worth the money. We had coffee a couple of times, followed by a few lunches before we went on our actual date. We were examined a bit by other customers at a really nice restaurant where I invited her. I was over 6 feet and quite large, thanks to Jody, and she was a petite Oriental beauty who was a foot shorter than me. I never told her that I financed this restaurant, and it was doing very well. Jimmy was half Korean and half Japanese, and, in my opinion, inherited the best physical features of both nationalities. She revealed that there was a lot of animosity between the two countries dating back to before World War II due to the many atrocities the Japanese committed against the Koreans, and this was what prompted her parents to move to North America. She grew up mostly in Canada and only moved here 4 years ago. There was still a Canadian influence in her accent, which was quite endearing. I told her my story. Born and raised here. 1 year of community college before I dropped out. An inheritance from a great-grandmother whose existence I didn't even know gave me the initial capital to start my business. I could see she was impressed. Wow, you must be very smart. I smiled. Not really. I just got some good advice from a very successful man. He told me that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to be smart enough to figure out who's smartest and use their intelligence. Most geniuses aren't very good at business. That's where I fit in. You must be very successful. I thought about my failures. Sometimes, there have been times when I've fallen on my butt, but I count every failure as a learning experience. Then I made her laugh in tears by telling me about some of my failures. Did you really think this was a good idea? Not now, but at the time it seemed like it made sense. We spent a pleasant evening just getting used to each other. After dinner, I took her to a performance by a local amateur theater group. They were pretty good and played a stage version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The actors in the audience kept the atmosphere lively by shouting "fool" to Brad's character at various points, and when the scene came where Dr. Frank and Furter asked Brad about tattoos, one audience member shouted, "Fools don't have tattoos." The actor who played the doctor looked at the audience and grinned. "Mine has it." She couldn't restrain herself and laughed so hard that she began to have hiccups. I was a sponsor and talked to everyone at the post-show meeting, and Jimmy struck up conversations with a lot of the cast. The woman who played Janet was still wearing her bra and semi-slips and struck up a conversation with her. "Aren't you uncomfortable in just your underwear?" Celeste, the actress, smiled. "No, honey, I like it. I have pretty nice breasts, and I like to show them off. You should see our vacation photos." "What does your husband say?" Just then, her husband, Jack, appeared next to her, still in his boxer shorts. He played Brad in the production. I smiled when I saw how the ice Jimmy slid towards his groin. Let's just say Jack didn't need to stuff his shorts. They had been married for 5 years and were devoted to each other, although after a late night and 2 bottles of wine, they both told me they were adventurous and wouldn't mind playing with discreet partners. Celeste looked at me with undisguised lust, but what scared me was that her husband, with the same sparkle in his eyes, was looking straight at my groin. I left shortly after that. As soon as I reached the door, her bra flew past me. I didn't look back. I took Jimmy home, and she asked me to wait in the hallway for a minute. When she called me inside, she was standing on a stool in a robe. As soon as I closed the door, she threw off her robe and stood in front of me in a white bra and semi-slips. "Touch, touch, touch me, I want to be dirty," she sang, beckoning me closer. It was a goodbye kiss. "This is a great start, honey. It's too early to move on, but time will take care of that if you keep asking me out." I later learned, to my surprise, that when we were lying horizontally, we were the same height. After that, we were inseparable. 3 months later, she was living with me. 6 months later, she was wearing my ring. For her birthday, I gave her the first of her gifts, a pair of Jimmy shoes, and on 4-inch heels. Jimmy, she grinned and said that I had wasted my money, but tried them on anyway. Ouch, there's something about it. She shook it out into her hand, and the ring fell out. She just looked at him for a few seconds. Then she looked at me. This. By that time, I was already on my knees. She was quite strong for her size, knocking me off my feet as she threw herself into my arms. I noticed that by the time I was able to get us both off the floor, she had already put the ring on. We got married with due pomp in front of friends and family the following June, went on our honeymoon to warmer climes where we mostly went nearly naked, and settled into domestic bliss. I was truly happy. Jimmy loved her job. She was very good at it, and I continued with my usual routine. I invested heavily in a security company when the main owner caught his wife cheating and didn't take it well. The lover's genitals were damaged, his wife suffered a permanent limp, and he was sent to a state guest house for 5 years. The business was quite successful, and I bought it at a significant discount because he urgently needed money to pay compensation to his ex-wife and pay for criminal lawyers. He had a prenuptial agreement, otherwise she would have taken the business. The man I brought in to manage it was retired from the Army with 15 years of experience as an inspector in the military police. I was surprised that there was little actual detective work. It was the digital age, and he assembled a group of geeks with very good skills, so that most of their work required few legs. However, he trained them all, and they were perfect. Who would have thought that a geek with a laptop could be a threat? I was working with them, setting everything up, and it made me paranoid. If you have a digital presence at all, you're an easy target, never mind the cameras. By the time all the changes were made, only 3 original employees remained. They mainly worked with corporate clients. I made them check all the businesses in which I had shares. Jimmy didn't like it when I presented her with the marriage contract. We almost broke up over this until my lawyer and her lawyer worked out a compromise. I put $250,000 in a trust fund and had to add 5% a year. If the marriage breaks down because of my infidelity, she will get the money, and that will be it. If she is caught cheating, she will leave with nothing but what we earned together, not counting my business. It seemed like, in the end, it was more of a business deal than a marriage, but I knew neither of us would ever cheat, so they were just words written on paper that we would both forget about in time. Apparently, I was wrong. We were married for a little over 4 years. I thought life was good. We were both active, fit people with a good circle of friends. My cousin got me into white water kayaking. Jimmy went a few times before she decided it wasn't for her and convinced me to be careful. My cousin emphasized this. "You're not invulnerable, and you can't breathe underwater. Every time we go out, you take more and more risks, wanting to overcome rapids that are actually worth going around. Water has classifications for a reason, and you shouldn't go out alone. Who knows what you can do without calmer conditions nearby? You continue to take stupid risks, and I don't want to walk with you anymore. I don't want to be the one to say, Jimmy, that you died doing something you knew was dangerous." Jimmy became interested in local theater products. We bought season tickets and often took friends along to enjoy something different. The 3 companies I was involved with were sponsors, as were my company and myself, Jimmy, personally. I worked on construction sites during the summers when I was young and often helped with the construction of sets. Jimmy joined in, painted, sanded, did everything she could to help. One evening, a few hours before the opening of a new production, one of the actresses called. she had an accident and ended up in the hospital with a broken leg in traction. The director was on the verge of panic when his gaze fell on Jimmy. There are only 2 lines and very little movement. Help me. She was scared to death the first night. It was visible on her face. By the time the curtain closed for the last time, she was hooked. Everyone said she was a natural talent, and as she gained experience, her skills improved until she often played minor roles. The time commitment was much more than I expected, but she liked it, so I didn't complain. But eventually I expressed how much I missed our time together, and she scaled back her participation, missing about every third production. She became friends with many actors, and they were often guests in our house. Celeste and Jack became good friends, and although there was flirting and innuendo when we were alone, they carefully respected boundaries. However, that didn't stop us all from ending up naked in the hot tub one evening. 4 bottles of wine and a constant sexy banter created the atmosphere all evening. When the girls wanted to take off their tops, I shocked them all by suggesting that we all strip naked. Even Jack blushed when I calmly stood up and threw my swimsuit on the deck. I wasn't shy and was secretly a little pleased that I was longer than Jack. Celeste almost tried to have sex with me in the jacuzzi, and Jack got too close to me, as I declared the night over by rising from the water and throwing a very surprised Jimmy over my shoulder. They got a great view of her ass when I left. Stay as long as you want, Jimmy, and I have things to do. Don't have sex in a jacuzzi. I just cleaned it. We reached the kitchen, and I set her down on the countertop. She was the perfect height, and we were soon at it. I noticed that although she was very into it, she kept looking outside. I turned her sideways, and there was Jack and Celeste having sex. When it was over, Celeste stood up, turned around, and winked at me. "Good night, Jimmy Roy. Thank you for a nice evening." She led him to the car, carrying their clothes. I guess it was a naked ride home. I carried Jimmy to bed, and we immediately fell asleep. We woke up a little hungover, but smiled at each other. Jimmy sat, drinking coffee, with a thoughtful look. Last night was interesting. I've never seen live sex before. It was. But I don't think we'll be inviting them into the hot tub anytime soon. I know them, and they'll take it as an invitation to cross boundaries. To emphasize my position on sex outside of marriage, I'll say this. If you want to have fun, we'll have fun. I'm ready to move out right away. There's no going back, understand? Jimmy shuddered as if torn out of a dream. Of course, dear, there was no need to say it, but it was still fun to watch and be noticed, right? It was, but it's not worth repeating again. What happened was the result of too much wine and a moment of passion. She agreed, but I saw some disappointment in her eyes. In a few weeks, Jimmy, I returned home from a theater guild meeting, delighted. I got the main role. I knew that she was excited, and I hugged her tightly and kissed her. "You can do it. Celeste is the one to watch out for." She laughed. "Jack and Philip will take care of it." Well, good for them. I like them, but I can't help but think that one day they will start playing, and that will be the end. One of them will do something you can't get away from. They are absolutely in love. I know it's not our way of life, but it seems to work for them, and they say it makes their sex life exciting. I chuckled at her enthusiasm. "Aren't you considering this whole monogamy thing?" She blushed and smiled. "Never. I like what we have. Besides, why don't we go to the bedroom, and I'll remind you of that." "There is one problem." "Which one, dear?" "The bedroom is too far." We made love. The next day, I took her to a local luxury lingerie store. This place was in business long before anyone knew about Vicky, and their choice put the national chain in an awkward position. It was fun. We moved forward at full speed and even started discussing children. Ujimi, there were no siblings either, and she fluctuated between 3 children one day and 4 the next. I was on board with whatever number she chose. I had another project. Our favorite restaurant closed due to poor management. The chef gave me a plan. We bought a closed restaurant, furniture and everything, renovated it a little, gathered very good staff to help in the kitchen, and an experienced owner or hostess to manage the hall. I invested in a restaurant early on and made a nice profit. It closed about a year after I came out. Without someone to oversee the finances or keep the chef's ego in check, things went downhill. He called trying to get me to reinvest, but I refused. He has already damaged the reputation of the establishment too much for it to recover. Restaurants in general have a horrendous failure rate, and my accountants were completely against it this time. The security checked the chef, and he was clean with a very good reputation. He had already turned down 2 lucrative job offers because his wife didn't want to move, and I knew he was pitching his idea to 2 more investment groups. In the end, I decided to take a risk. I could write off most of it if it failed, but I still believed it would be long-term. I got the business for next to nothing. The owner was trying to earn enough to avoid bankruptcy. I owned 60% of the business. The chef contributed some money and his reputation for his 40%. As usual, I included a buyout option in the agreement, 5% per year after 2 years. The real estate company connected us with very good building contractors, and the renovation looked even better than we expected and came in on budget. Perhaps it was time to think about a construction business. Jimmy developed a very good advertising campaign, including a viral one, and on the first evening of opening, we were completely full. The dinner was free and diners were randomly selected through an online lottery. We left a few tables for critics and journalists. They got a selection of the best dishes, and the articles and word of mouth were amazing. I tried to be there. Jack and Celeste were our guests, mainly because Celeste had a food blog. They brought their friend Philip with them, and I thought he was a little arrogant and thought too much of himself as an actor. He appeared in several local commercials, played several small roles in films filmed in the area, and took part in a 6-week guest show on a daytime soap opera. He just couldn't understand why Hollywood wasn't knocking on his door. Despite this, he seemed harmless and was actually quite funny. It occurred to me that perhaps he had missed his calling as a stand-up comedian. His companion was Cynthia, one of the board members and the main director. She was 10 years older than Philip, and she was clearly fascinated by him. She was also married to an unforgiving man. I wonder if he knew where she was. She knew me, and more importantly, she knew my principles. I'm so glad Celeste called and asked me to fill in so that Philip was not a fifth wheel. With Jim gone for a week and not coming home for another 4 days, I was already climbing the walls. It's so good to go out with friends. She sold it, but it smelled like snake oil. I didn't buy it, but I remained neutral. Not my problem, but if what I suspected was true and Jim ever found out, Philip wouldn't audition for leading roles anymore. His facial modifications will put him in the weird friends zone, and he'll deserve every bump he gets. Celeste looked at me and smiled. She knew what I was thinking. We became good friends, better friends than me and Jack could ever be, and she lived her standards openly, so I had no reason to judge. The food was great, and the conversation was stellar, apart from the contribution Philip. Celeste deliberately said things he couldn't understand and smiled when he was confused. It was angry, but pleasant. If looks could kill, Cynthia would have laid Celeste on the floor. Strange, but this also seemed to upset Jimmy, although she tried not to show it. It made me wonder how long it took him to remember his lines. After a decadent dessert served with a very rich coffee, Jack and Philip suggested going clubbing to burn off some calories. I can't. I need to stay and shake some hands, remember? Gene will be hysterical if I leave him to his fate. He can cook with the best of them, but he has no communication skills. We're working on it. Celeste said the same thing. I have to stay too. I have to interview the chef and get the customers' reactions. Then I have to come back tomorrow and photograph some of the dishes and randomly film the customers. I would have done it tonight, but I wanted to enjoy the dinner from the customer's point of view. Do you mind if we go ahead? You can catch up with us when you're done. Celeste frowned at Jack while Philip smiled. Jimmy intervened. Do you mind? This way I can get all the fast dancing out of the way, and when you come we can just dance with each other until we get tired. We watched them leave, and Celeste turned to me, placing her hand on my arm. Everything will be okay, Roy. Nothing will happen. I just smiled. Who are you trying to convince, dear? Me or yourself? She sighed. Jack has been going a little overboard lately. I thought we were really on the same page in our relationship, but now I'm starting to worry. Your life, Celeste. If you want my opinion, if it bothers you, bring it to light. I think that, despite your lifestyle, you are a wonderful woman, and Jack is a fool if he jeopardizes your attitude. You could replace him in a heartbeat, but he'll never find someone like you again. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she hugged me tightly. Gathering her strength, she smiled at me. If everything goes wrong and I'm free, I'll keep an eye on Jimmy, like a hawk waiting for her to make a mistake. It will never happen, but if it does, I'll be on you, Roy, and it will only be you until you drive me away. I kissed her on the cheek and told her that she would be the first one I would contact. We carried out our duties until we completed everything that was required of us. Jack and Philip looked like they had run a marathon. When we arrived at the club, Jimmy and Cynthia, everyone was still dancing on the floor, full of energy and dedication. I was surprised because I had never seen her like this. She turned around, saw me, and screamed with happiness, almost knocking me over as she jumped into my arms and gave me a kiss. Darling, let's go dancing. The slow music started, and she pressed herself as close to me as possible given the height difference. She looked into my eyes the entire song. She sat while the others danced, holding my hand until Celeste came over. Let him go, honey. If he wants a good review, he should dance with the blogger. Jimmy giggled and pushed me towards her. We danced for about a minute before the music changed and a slow song started. Celeste didn't miss a beat as she pressed herself close to me and rested her head on my shoulder. This continued for a couple of minutes until her head lifted and a displeased look appeared on her face. Jack danced with Jimmy and was too close to her, and she didn't seem to resist much. She led us to them and pushed us away Jimmy to me. Don't be a fool, honey. Dance with your husband. She grabbed Jack, and they didn't look like a happy couple. We left when the song ended. Celeste and Jack seemed to be arguing. Jimmy was silent on the way home and fell asleep when I parked the car. I thought about leaving her in the car, but love overcame anger, so I carefully picked her up and laid her in bed like a child. I was too excited to lie down, so I tried to watch Curiosity stream until I dozed off in my chair. I woke up at 6:30 and knew I wouldn't be able to get back to sleep, so I put on the coffee and took a shower. 2 hours later, Jimmy slinked into the kitchen and grabbed a cup of coffee. We sat in silence for a while before she asked in a quiet voice, "Did I do something stupid last night?" Define stupid. Let me rephrase this. Did I do something that could harm our relationship? I frowned as I collected my thoughts. Not really, but you were close enough to the edge that the slightest push could have thrown you over. The actions were more than borderline acceptable, at least once. If you want to leave the marriage, tell me now, because I don't. I'll last a lot longer if you keep this up. Her reaction surprised me. She turned pale and vomited all over the kitchen table, moaning no over and over again. I cleared the table, pushed Jimmy into the shower, and cleaned us both up, then put her back to bed. She didn't get up until 5 in the evening. She found me in a suit and was surprised. I have to go back to the restaurant, remember. Celeste is coming to finish up her photos for the blog. You were supposed to come with me, but I don't think you're up to it. I have to be back by 8 in the evening. I didn't give her the opportunity to object. I walked past her and left. Gene was nervous as it was his official opening. Yesterday was by invitation only, and the menu was more limited. This time he presented a full menu and was fully booked by 10 in the morning. The kitchen was a complete frenzy, so I stayed away until Celeste chased the cooks, waiters, and assistants. An hour later, she returned to me, sighing as she sat down. She smiled at me. You still know how to do it, dear. This place will be another gold mine for you. I relaxed while drinking coffee. The coffee machine that the barista insisted on was worth its weight in gold. I responded with a smile. I hope so. This is just the first step. We'll be opening 2 new locations next year, one in Atlanta and one in Jacksonville. If they work, we'll be all over the country and in Canada in 3 years. The ad guys are working on tie-ins, culinary books, personal appearances, television appearances, the whole package. Gene may have to give up his chef status a little earlier than we expected. Her eyes widened before she smiled. You're always playing the long game, aren't you? Your investment choices always seemed random to me. It took me a couple of years to see the method in your madness. How many institutions does Jody have now? 19, with 2 more on the way before the end of the year. And you own a part of each of them. Without holding back a smile, I answered, yes, very small, but very profitable shares. Is there anything else in stock? I'm looking at a couple of other possibilities, things I don't want to talk about until they're a deal. Her smile grew wider. I'm sure I'll read about it in the paper. Then she changed the subject. Do you want to talk about last night? A little. I haven't talked to Jimmy yet. What surprises me is what we might have found if we had come an hour later. Celeste took my hand. Don't rush to conclusions. You know that Jimmy loves you. I think she just drank too much, and it clouded her judgment. Besides, you saw how happy she was when we arrived. I had to admit that she was right, but I don't think that fully justifies me. I took my last sip of coffee. I'm going home now. Let's see what she says. Jimmy attacked me as soon as I returned home. Apologies came one after another. I finally got her to calm down. I know you were drunk. It doesn't bother me that much. What really bothers me is that you got drunk with 2 idiots. Philip was all over Cynthia, a married woman, and Jack is sleeping with everything that he's the type who would see you being drunk as an opportunity. I want your word that it won't happen again. Do you understand? She swore on the lives of our unborn children that this would never happen again. We went to bed, and when she touched me, I gently stopped her. You're not in shape yet, honey. I don't want half-assed sex that you're not really invested in. Let's play tomorrow. She sighed and snuggled closer to me. Do you promise? I promise. Over the next few months, when we went out, she significantly reduced her alcohol intake. The only time she allowed herself to get a little drunk was when we were alone, and she knew I would take care of her. Jimmy was a sexual dynamo under normal circumstances, but with a little alcohol, she took it to a whole new level. I suspect it had a lot to do with her actions that night, and she agreed, promising it wouldn't happen again. It takes a lot of effort to stage a live play. Endless rehearsals, costume fittings, if the performance was historical or fantasy, small correspondence to adapt to the actor's capabilities. Add in sound checks, lighting adjustments, blocking off positions on stage that audiences can't see, and getting props and sets ready at short notice, all of which kept the guild on their toes until the show began. I was extremely busy with several projects, so I didn't have time to help. Everyone made me promise to come to the premiere, so I rearranged my schedule. Jimmy smiled when I showed her the t-shirt I made to wear at the premiere. It had a sexy photo of her on it, and the logo said, I'm married to a theater girl. I walked into the auditorium and was greeted by a very nervous Celeste. She was not involved in the play. Her blog took off, and she spent a lot of time maintaining it. Sponsorship increased, especially from the food industry, and she began filming in remote locations. Organic farms, large meat processing plants, small dairies, and then following the path of products from farms and factories to consumers, including grocery stores, farmers' markets, and restaurants. My advertising team had been helping her, and she was now in the planning stages of a show we were going to pitch to Food Networks and PBS. One of my new projects was a video studio. Celeste introduced me, and I toured the facility and met with the management team. They were open about their needs. We're doing pretty well, and we need to expand. Unfortunately, we've reached our credit limit, and the banks don't want to finance the expansion. We have great capabilities in making videos and short films, but we have minimal business experience. Celeste thinks that we could be very useful to each other. I carefully studied the proposal and liked what I saw. The two owners invested every cent of their personal money into a short animated film that promised to be a success. Unfortunately, they turned down jobs because they didn't have the opportunity. I ended up purchasing 60% of their business, paying off existing debt and obtaining the financing needed to expand. I explained the buyout terms I had always offered, and they surprised me by asking me to wait 2 years before discussing it again. This will give us time to find someone to run the business. In the meantime, we think you will be pleased. Business was exciting. If Celeste got her show, I would become an executive producer, even if I wasn't quite sure what that meant. I smiled as I kissed her cheek. She was under a lot of stress trying to get her show off the ground, and she and Jack weren't getting along. He doesn't even seem to miss me. We haven't played with each other, much less anyone else, in quite a while. He doesn't seem to care if I'm around. This set off alarm bells. Jack was known for his love affairs. If he didn't get it at home, I sympathized with her. Jimmy and I also miss quality time together. I travel a lot, and she is busy with work and rehearsals. I'm going to ask her to take a break and focus on us for a while. I'm almost done with traveling and would like to get back to talking about children. I'm 36 years old, and I want to be able to chase them when they come. Celeste smiled sadly. She and Jack decided early on not to have children. He did the right procedure and wanted her to do the same, but she resisted. Great news, I said, thinking I could cheer her up. PBS and the Home and Garden Network are interested, plus the Food Network called and wants to meet us. Looks like you're going to be a star, honey. She smiled, but not as joyfully as I expected. I didn't get a chance to explain that Home and Garden wanted a standalone show focused on farms and the food industry, while PBS was leaning more towards restaurants. She may end up hosting 2 shows, using material from both whenever possible. Look, Roy, I need to prepare you. The show is about adultery, and originally included a bedroom scene about cheaters having sex for the first time. I fought to get it removed and thought I had succeeded until Cynthia told me that she just brought her back into the show. Please remember, it's just a play and everyone is pretending. The way she said it made me realize that this was not going to be a pleasant experience. I was more than right. Philip played the male lead, and he interacted well with Jimmy. I had to wonder how hard it was for him because it seemed natural to him. The final scene was them having sex together. As a cheap motel sign flashed at the end of the stage, a spotlight illuminated a king-size bed in the middle of the room. The actors entered from different sides of the bed. Philip, in his arrogance, wore a man's thong. I don't think any women in the audience were impressed by its size. Jimmy came on stage. In fact, she was almost naked. As she slid into bed, the lights went out as they reached for each other. If they were expecting loud applause, they were mistaken. There were some sniffles, then silence before a few hesitant spectators began to applaud. Celeste squeezed my hand and didn't let go. Please calm down, Roy. It's just a play. It doesn't mean anything. Did you see what I saw? Let me go, Celeste. She tried to hold me back, but I gently bent her little finger back until she was forced to let me go or hear it break. She finally released me with a sigh, and I turned and headed towards the reception area where the actors usually interact with the guests. Jimmy stood between Philip and Jack, still in her dress, smiling widely. The women either didn't look at her or did so with barely concealed contempt. The men just stared. Jack was directing, and they were basking in praise when I stood in front of them. Smile Jimmy went out when she saw the expression on my face. Put some damn clothes on. She ran backstage, leaving Philip and Jack. Both of them grinned at all 32. Your wife is one hot thing. What, Philip? I was going to say more, but it stopped when I hit it. Jack tried to run away, but didn't have time. You idiot, did you think I would stand there and do nothing? The grin returned. I don't care what you can stand, asshole. Jimmy was delighted, especially with the extra rehearsals we did to make it convincing. I'll hit him. Everyone around me stood in horror, and I stared at the 2 board members. Did you approve of this crap? To hell with you. On Monday, you will receive a letter notifying me that I am revoking my patronage, as well as the patronage of any company I am associated with. This shocked them. Between my personal patronage and the patronage of my company, about 40% of their budget was added up. They will have to fight to find new sponsors, or the season will be in jeopardy. They tried to smooth things over by saying that the rehearsal they saw didn't include the bedroom scene when Cynthia burst in screaming at the top of her lungs. It was a play. None of this was real, you troglodyte. Well, that changes things. Just because you hang around, you think every woman around you should do the same? Grow up and put those worn-out breasts back in your dress. I don't think they impress guys as much as they did when you were 30. She turned pale. Her breasts were obviously supported by a very nice bra that was practically poking her in the face. The worst part was the look of shock on her face. Celeste approached, gently tugging at her hand. "Roy, please calm down." I pushed her hand away. "I thought you were my friend. You could have warned me, given me a chance to stop this mess. But you didn't. You think Jack is sleeping with her, don't you? Looks like old Jack wants to play alone now and leave yours." I stopped when I saw the horror on her face. It was a pretty well-known secret in the guild, but the public didn't know about it, and I almost gave them away. Sorry. That was all I had time to say before I was knocked off my feet by a huge woman. She was clearly over 6 feet tall and weighed about 250 pounds. It felt like when she tackled me to the ground, not much of it was fat. It turned out that Philip there was a wife. What a mess that unfolded that night. She hit me. By then, the police had arrived, and we were both handcuffed. Dr. Sexamined Philip and Jack. It took an hour to figure everything out. I am a local resident and have always supported the police, and Philip was an outsider, so I got the benefit of the doubt. They convinced his wife to say that they would not press charges if I let her attack me. Celeste walked away, holding Jack as slow tears streamed down her cheeks. She was the only one I felt sorry for in this terrible situation. Jimmy first appeared in a robe, surveyed the scene, and ran away, returning later in jeans and a t-shirt. Her theatrical makeup was still on her face, and she looked terrible. I think raccoons would be offended by being compared to her. I looked her straight in the eyes as soon as the handcuffs were removed, ripped off my shirt, and spat on her before throwing her to the ground. She ran out of the hall crying, and I didn't see her again until the next day. I looked pretty weird walking into a 24-hour Walmart wearing only a jacket and jeans, but it was very late at night, and it was Walmart. I'm sure they've seen worse. I grabbed a couple of shirts and a pair of jeans, some underwear and socks. I had no intention of returning home, so I stayed at a hotel in a nearby town. My phone kept ringing, so I translated put it into silent mode and didn't look at it until the middle of the next day. 30 calls from Jimmy, 5 from different board members, 1, strangely, from his wife Philip, and 2 from Celeste. I listened to a few from Jimmy. They were as I expected. It was just a play. Nothing happened. I'm being too dramatic, and I need to get home so she can explain everything. I listened carefully, but not once did I hear an apology for what she had done. I stopped after the 8th one and deleted the rest. The calls from board members all repeated the same thing. It was just a play. They didn't know that the bedroom scene had been brought back. Jack and Philip were dropped from the remainder of the season. Cynthia was asked to resign. They seemed to be trying to make things right, so I might give them a second chance. The call from that scoundrel's wife was interesting. "Listen, I don't know who should be apologizing. You shouldn't have hit him that hard. I shouldn't have attacked you. I don't think anything happened, but if it did, and you have proof, I'm asking." I agree that the bedroom scene was extremely tasteless, but I think Jack and my husband were feeding each other, and your wife was in the middle. I made it clear to him that he's done with the guild, and if he can't make enough money from acting in the next 6 months, he'll have to get a real job. He started doing the guild just to get a little more attention. Looks like at least one of them had some character. I called back, and we had a long conversation. We didn't become friends, but we didn't become enemies either. The conversation with Celeste was a little more difficult. When she answered, I started talking so she couldn't get a word in edgewise. Listen, I'm sorry about last night. I was very upset, and maybe I went too far. Your lifestyle is your business as long as it doesn't affect me. I appreciate you very much, honey, but you have decisions coming up where, like, I don't think Jack will be involved. If I see him anytime soon, he'll probably get another hit. I'd rather you didn't crossed me out of my life, but if necessary, I will understand it. When I stopped breathing, there was silence. Then she began. You've hurt me, Roy. In all the time I've known you, you've never once spoken out directly against my lifestyle. Jack can be a jerk and sometimes goes too far. He should never have brought back that bedroom scene. I suspect that he only did it to make you angry. He feels threatened by you, Roy. You're smarter than him, much more successful, but what scares him the most is your size. He's adamant that we're sleeping together because we spend so much time together. He is confident, and I use his words, that one day you will have sex with me and I will be spoiled. I couldn't help but laugh. I don't want to hurt your feelings, honey, but I'm not that big. Jack isn't that small. And just so you know, I would never have sex with you if we were dating. I would make love to you like you deserve, and then, if we continued, then we would have sex. I can't imagine it being anything less than great. I felt her blush. I have to go, honey. Call me later when you want to discuss show options. Well, at least one bridge has been restored. Jimmy was a different story. I called her and didn't give her a chance to speak. Home, 6 o'clock. You better come with a clear head and don't lie. If I catch you in a lie, I'll leave and everything will be over. If I find out that you cheated on me, the marriage contract will come into force. I don't you'll show mercy. None. When I arrived, she was sitting on the sofa. I was pleased to see that she had not been drinking. We both needed a clear mind to deal with this. Honey, I raised my hand. I would like to talk and ask a few questions first, if you don't mind. Knowing how organized she is and how her brain works, I'm sure she's made a plan and thought of everything about how to present it. Spin doctors don't like being put in a reactive situation. What I did threw the script out the window. Who chose the play you presented? Jack, but when you read it, especially the bedroom at the end, did you think it was appropriate for a provincial audience? She was a little confused. Jack said it would be good for the city to get people out of their comfort zone and expand their horizons. And you agreed? Not right away, but Jack and Philip said. Ah, words from the fountain of knowledge and morality. Jimmy was now glowing. Can I say something? Yes, it was incredibly stupid and completely inexcusable. The guild received many calls after that night, and none of them were flattering. So far, 17 subscribers of the season have demanded their money back. 2 more corporate sponsors have refused support. This could be the end of local theater. I'm sorry if I can't sympathize with them much. Please, Roy, you don't have to forgive Jack or Philip or even me, but you loved that theater. Think twice before you destroy it. They may never come back. She was right, but at that moment I didn't care. Did you sleep with them? No. Have you thought about this? Have your rehearsals ever gotten out of control? Look me in the eye and tell me nothing inappropriate happened. And most of all, tell me why you thought I wouldn't care if you walked out practically naked on stage, and then you would take part without clothes. She cried a lot, and instead of comforting her, I just waited for her to calm down. Jack didn't tell me until the very last moment that the bedroom scene was back on the program. He and Philip gave me a nightie and promised that no one would see it because they would darken the light before I went on stage. Then Jack just pushed me onto the stage, and I had no choice. I see. The play must go on. Let me ask you, when he said the bedroom scene was back on, why didn't you tell them to go to hell and refuse to do it? When Jack pushed you, you could have just backed down. You know what I think? I think you decided why not, although you knew that it would be embarrassing for me and would make me very angry. Even then, if you wore a robe, I might have forgiven you for doing something. Then from this, hell no. You walked out there practically naked. I stopped Jimmy. The The scream was primal, and she rushed towards me, begging and crying at the same time. I just held her until she fell asleep. I sat for a while, feeling her deepen in my embrace, her grip never weakening. Did I still love her? Yes, I did. Did I think I could forgive what she did? Maybe. The next morning, she woke up to the smell of coffee. I was at the table when she walked in, wearing one of my old t-shirts, her silky black hair tousled. She has never looked more attractive to me. She took the cup and started talking. She spoke for half the morning, and a lot became clearer. She was afraid to have children. She was jealous of Celeste, and Jack fueled that jealousy by telling her that it was okay for him if I slept with his wife, and he would be happy to reciprocate. Philip joined in, telling her how sexy she is and that she deserves better. She swore there was no sex between them. It shocked me when she said that since we fell in love, she always woke up with the thought that I was about to realize that I was married to a small half-breed foreigner with the breasts of a little girl and almost no ass, which I need to get rid of. It was a long way back. We went to consultations together, and I went to another therapist. After all, I could understand how it could have happened, given her mood and falling into the hands of a couple of successful predators, but I still thought that her love for me and common sense should have prevailed. No wonder the theater guild almost collapsed. There were no more performances that season. The last 3 plays were canceled. Cynthia got divorced. It was pretty ugly, and Philip was named in a lawsuit for alienation of affection. He had nothing, and Cynthia's husband told him that if he admitted that he had sex with Cynthia, he would drop the lawsuit. Being the gentleman he is, he threw her under the bus and sang like a nightingale. Philip's wife, Anne, ashamed to death and tired of her husband's infidelities, divorced him. He had the audacity to ask for child support because he was unemployed. The judge laughed when his lawyer suggested it. You have a degree and some experience, Mr. Cassius Lawson. The job market is hot right now, so I have no doubt that you will find a position quickly. Application denied. Almost a year later, I received a visit from Celeste and the new board of directors of the old theater guild. If Celeste hadn't asked in person, I would have told them to kiss my ass. I was not inclined to bear a grudge, and many promises were made about control of both materials and personnel, and they almost begged me to accept a seat on the board of directors. Celeste approached me personally, so I agreed and helped prepare for the new season, which includes many children's plays. I was even in one, playing a cow in the children's version of Into the Woods. I was delighted, and the local critics said I stole every scene I was in. However, my theatrical activities were limited to this because the work at that time was quite demanding. Celeste was appointed artistic director, carefully selecting productions and directing most of them. This made her happy. Celeste tried for months before she simply gave up and divorced Jack. He didn't like it, and it got to the point where she had to threaten to get a restraining order if he didn't leave her alone. She and I spent a lot of time together on business, and Wedgemy tried their best to console her. I insisted Thatchemy spent more time with me, and she often traveled with me when I traveled on projects, especially when it came to Celeste. I think it was half envy and half admiration for how television worked. Celeste signed a deal with the Food Network for 13 episodes, visiting restaurants primarily in the Southeast. In one episode, she was in California, and in another, she was in Vancouver. We didn't go to California with her, but turned the trip to Canada into a vacation. Celeste met with one of the crew members, a senior producer, and the 4 of us had a great time. We had 2 suites at one of the top hotels, and ours had a hot tub. One night, after a few drinks, we shocked the hell out of her new man by stripping off and getting into the bathtub. Celeste and George didn't seem in a hurry, and I smiled, remembering the last time we were in the bath together. Bless it if you want. I'm not the one to clean it. Once again, they got a very nice view of the ice gemas. I carried her into the bedroom. Jimmy accompanied Celeste because she was the publicist in charge of her career, and she did it brilliantly. An offer came from Home and Garden for another show that we proposed, and we agreed. She'll do 10 shows a year for them and 20 for the Food Network, leaving her about 10 weeks a year for vacations and personal appearances. The remaining weeks will be her time to relax. There was even talk of a book or two as companion material. The production company flourished. The guys finished an animated short film that they had been working on for a couple of years, and it was nominated for an Oscar. He didn't come close to winning, but he brought them a lot of recognition and job offers. Deciding that I had done all I could for them, I looked for another project. After a few months, Jimmy came to me looking as nervous as a Boy Scout minister on his way to the duh. "Can I ask you something?" "No." She showed up stunned. "What?" "Well, that was a stupid question, so I thought I'd give a stupid answer. What's on your mind?" "Please listen to me before you say anything. I would like to act in amateur productions again. Not in our city. God knows, they don't even like me being in the audience. No, in Janesville, they're starting a theater guild, and I'd like to be a part of it." Janesville was a small town 15 miles away. I think the whole city was less than 5,000 people. I thought about it for a minute. I don't really like it. "You're welcome, dear. They're only planning on doing 3 plays this year. They desperately need someone with experience. You could join too. You're not very busy right now. It could be fun for both of us." "Do they know about the last play you were in?" She blushed a little as she answered. "No, and I'd prefer it not come up in conversation. Please, Roy, I miss it. I missed the piece I had before, but I didn't say it out loud. Let's meet them. Let's see what happens." She expressed her gratitude 3 times that night. This hasn't happened for a long time. Good thing I didn't have morning meetings the next day. We had a meeting with them. They seemed nervous and inexperienced. Their leader was a local high school English teacher and drama director. He got a degree in drama, but had to take what he could get after graduating from college. He even appeared in several off-Broadway productions and spent the summer touring with the road company producing Oklahoma. He sighed. "It's kind of a dream for me. I lived in a big city before moving here and was deeply involved in the theater guild there. I talked to some of my old friends, and they encouraged me to do it, even offering to give me some of their old my school students are excited, and some of us have drama backgrounds, but the rest are just housewives, production workers, or office workers who have no idea what they are getting themselves into. Some will quit when they see how much time they have to devote. Some will leave because it's not what they expected. The rest of us will just carry on." I appreciated his honesty. I also appreciated that they seemed to be mostly moral people and not prone to anything provocative. "Have you ever seen the production of Unlawful Affair?" Bob, the teacher, made a face. "Yes, I did. It was pretty bad, and the audience didn't like it. Unpleasant subject was the most common comment. They did one show and closed it." "Was there a bedroom scene in it?" "Hell no. I've never heard of anyone who had the courage to leave her. If you're asking if we're going to do something like that, the answer is a resounding no. It's a small town. Farmers, workers, factory workers, and that's not something they'll like." I liked this guy. Jimmy immersed herself in working with the group, dragging me along with her when I was not busy. Everyone was scared to death doing their first play. Jimmy didn't play in it. She was listed in the program as an assistant director. There weren't many people in the audience at the first show, and I think they were disappointed. I promised them that next time it would be better. They put on a children's version of Into the Woods next. Jimmy told them what a wonderful cow I was, and they dragged me in to play the role. The lead role was played by a 16-year-old girl who stole the show because she was so good. The room was full because one of the corporate sponsors, McCoy Investing Inc., purchased all the tickets and distributed them to the community. The applause at the end of the performance lasted 15 minutes, and I made sure that every woman in the production, including those backstage, received a bouquet of roses. Everyone wore their suits during the post-show meet and greet. I was in the head of a cow. One little girl, about 7 years old, ran up and poked me. "Moo," she laughed. I answered her torment, which caused her and her friends to laugh even more. Since Jimmy was in the play, I invited Celeste to the play. She came home from filming one of her shows, and I thought some normalcy would do her good. She showed up with some network executive, and he was in the middle of making fun of the production when she hit him in the stomach. Strongly, he took the hint and behaved himself. After the show, the party was held in an ice cream parlor in deference to the children in the production. The local newspaper made a big deal out of it, and they had to extend their run for another week. I think there were no empty seats in the hall, and everyone paid for the tickets. I came from a meeting about something that might be my next project and found Jimmy and Celeste at our kitchen table, barely holding a bottle of wine. They giggled about her date at the play. She saw me and grinned. This was our first and last date. He should have gone in a suit. He could be a jerk. After they stopped laughing, she told us that the only reason he came with her was to try to lure her away from our production company by promising her immense fame and fortune if she signed a contract with him. Jimmy asked her what she told him. I told him that if he kissed my ass at noon in the food court of our largest shopping center and gave me time to advertise, I would think about it. He left that night. Jody got me involved in my next venture. She frequented the bar that had been a landmark in her hometown for years, and the owner had died. His widow did not have the strength or skill to support him, so she put him up for sale. Jody wanted me to partner with her and revitalize the place. I didn't have much to do, and the bar owner wasn't on my resume yet, so I agreed to look it up. Jimmy and Celeste came with me, and within 15 minutes, they were laughing hysterically. It turns out it was an alternative lifestyle bar, a mixture of gay people. Despite Jody and the manager, we were all noticed within 30 minutes. This place was huge, but it had seen better days. I could see the potential, but not necessarily in the current incarnation. After talking about it with the owner in her office, we went in search Jimmy and Celeste. Jimmy was on the dance floor with a very attractive woman, and Celeste sat at a table full of guys taking shots. They recognized her from her performances and were determined to entertain her. Jody took the opportunity to introduce me, and I found myself at a table with 3 ladies. One was a very attractive blonde, shorter than Jimmy. The other one was a really hot, dark babe, as she called herself. Whoever did her surgery was a genius because her breasts looked very natural, and there were a lot of them. The third was a Latina with classic curvy hips, waist-length hair, and small breasts. She saw me looking and laughed. I know my breasts are tiny compared to these bitches, but I'm on hormones. Don't worry, baby, you'll love them. We were far enough away from the DJ to have a conversation, and they did a good job of convincing me about the potential of the place, how a refurbishment would help, but most of all they wanted to turn it into something more than just a bar and hangout spot. They talked about inviting fashion experts, booking exotic dancers to work for their audience every 3 months. They even talked about sponsored sports teams. We are the perfect target. All of us gay people almost always have good jobs. Very rarely any of us have children, so we have a lot more free money than most. If only we had a place where we felt if you were safe and comfortable, think how much of this money could be in your pocket. The little blonde girl did most of the talking, and I found out that she was an accountant, which made me pay more attention to her. All 3 had skills and contributed to the conversation. We were so immersed in conversation that we didn't notice the girls approaching. Jimmy sat down next to her and smiled. Surrender, girls. He's mine, and I'm not going to let him start experimenting. The Latina smiled. Don't automatically dismiss this opportunity, honey. I play for both teams, and we could have a good time together. I didn't have time to blush before Desiree intervened. Turn me on, girls. Amy, the blonde, put in her 2 cents. What am I, minced meat? Include me in this little pile. I was beaming and Celeste was banging on the table and laughing so hard. One of the guys following me jumped up and said, Forget about these ladies, sweetie. Let me show you what real sex is. We ended up getting 3 tables together and having a party. The DJ turned on the music, and I had to dance with everyone, even this guy. They must have bribed the DJ because every time I walked onto the set, a slow song would start within a minute. I just accepted it. This will make a great story someday. Thank God we didn't have to go back to the hotel. I barely remember getting into bed. We all came out of our bedrooms and just looked at each other. Not a word. Can you hear me? Not a word about last night. The ladies grinned. Jody grinned wider than anyone. I won't say anything. Besides, I have a lot of photographs. Celeste was holding her laptop. I wouldn't bother Jody. This place has Facebook, and we mention them everywhere as possible owners. There's a really good photo of Roy dancing with Chuck. He looks absolutely adorable snuggling up to Roy, doesn't he? We all crowded around, and she wasn't lying. There were photographs of all of us. Jimmy danced cheek to cheek with Desiree, Celeste at the guy's table, while they all tried to kiss her on the cheek at the same time. Jody kisses a Latina. We all agreed that we were out of town and doubted that any of our friends were friends with the club. After breakfast, Jody asked me what I thought. He has some potential. You know, you're wealthy enough to buy this place on your own. Why do you need me? I need your knowledge. This could be a gold mine, but most of all, I need your luck. I'm not always lucky. I'll take the risk based on your track record. I would love to do this, but I will not go forward alone. We ended up forming Junior Enterprises LLC and buying the place. Remodeling the bar and opening it turned out to be more work than we thought, and for a while we were there once or twice a week. It was too far to get to work, so we always spent the night. I asked Jimmy, will she be jealous because I spend so much time with Jody? I think you're safe, dear. 4 weeks later, we are almost done. The grand opening was scheduled in 2 weeks. We left part of the club open so that our visitors would not forget us. Most of the regulars came every Thursday to get an update on the renovations. I got lucky when we found out that Desiree was an interior designer in real life, and we hired her as a consultant. I told Jody about this, and she just grumbled. I told you, you're lucky. Jimmy, and it was difficult for me to devote enough time to each other. If I wasn't busy, she was in the theater group. The new season was starting, and she was engrossed in helping them choose the plays they wanted to produce. Jimmy wanted to direct the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but was quickly rejected due to the conservative nature of the community. Celeste was going to participate in the old group on a limited basis because she was leaving to film the next series of shows for Home and Garden. They worked a tight schedule, trying to fit 10 shows into 5 weeks. The club has finally opened at full capacity. It was crowded. They started turning people away quite early on, giving those who couldn't get in a gold pass that guaranteed them priority entry the next time they came. The pass included a free first drink. We hired Tina, a Latina who actually used to be a man, whom I met on the first night, as a manager. It turned out that she had a degree in hotel management, but was having a hard time finding a job in her field. I insisted on a security team. 5 men and 3 women, all trained in their fields. 2 worked at the club, 2 patrolled the parking lot, and 1 watched everything on the monitors in their small office. Everyone was connected and could come together at any time in the event of an incident. Tina thought it was too much until 2 bouncers drove away 2 cars with men, intending to make an example out of someone, after which she didn't say another word. The club also had good relations with the local police. 2 of the security guards were retired police officers, and the office always had hot coffee and snacks, usually homemade, from one of the clients. Over time, when the frequency of police calls almost disappeared, everyone relaxed. I stopped by my accountants for my annual review. They estimated that I was worth about $4 million, but most of it was invested in various endeavors. They estimated that my fortune would double in 4 years and get settled in 10. I thought about it for a few days and decided now was a great time to take a break. My thoughts were that now would be a great time to start a family. Jimmy surprised me with a couple of things. She wasn't as excited as I thought I would be at home almost full-time for a while and wasn't particularly keen on having children. She was 34 and I was 38, and I saw our window of opportunity closing. My world started to fall apart a month after I attended a show and saw a familiar face in the crowd. It looked like Jack, but the guy disappeared before I could get there. Then I looked at the program and saw another familiar face, Philip. His bio said he was a local businessman and former professional actor who enjoyed performing in amateur theater productions. My health worsened when I joined Jimmy after the performance. She read my mood and remained silent, never leaving my side. I didn't bring this up until we were on our way home. So when were you going to tell me that Philip joined your troupe? He hasn't been with us long, honey, and we never cross paths. If I find out he's in a play, I skip it and work on the next one. I have to remind you that nothing happened then, and nothing happened now either. It will happen. I didn't tell you because I knew it would upset you. You know, I think I saw Jack in the audience. Maybe. He and Philip moved in together to save money after their divorces, and they seem to enjoy living together. Similar lifestyles, I guess. I spoke to him once and told him to stay away and we'll get along. Please don't worry. I'm a grown girl and can take care of myself, and I try to never be alone with one of them. She sounded convincing, and although we had one of the best evenings after that, I couldn't stop thinking about them. She started spending more time at work. I asked Bob and Jan, and both said the firm was in the midst of preparing for an important presentation for a client with national coverage, and everyone was trying their best. I noticed that she never leaves her phone unattended and seems to guard it like gold. When you put it all together and add to that the unusual amount of time she spends preparing for a new play, I get a very uneasy feeling. I went to the detective agency and talked to Major. That was his name based on his rank in the Army, and since many of the employees were veterans, the title stuck. We spent some time alone in his office, and he sighed. Are you sure you want to go down this path, Roy? Everything you've told me seems to have a reasonable explanation, and if it's all paranoia on your part, and she finds out that you've been testing her, she'll be very unhappy. I thought a lot before making this decision, Major. If you have time, look into it. Okay? The easiest way is to hack her phone, if you can get it for me. We'll probably outsource most of this because she knows me and a lot of the staff from our parties. Remember, she interviewed most of us. When did they do that murder mystery thing? Do you have a time frame? A week or two should be enough. I don't know how much it will help you. He sighed. I'll start tomorrow. When can I access her phone? I had to think. The only time she didn't have it was when she was charging it. Can you send the guy after midnight? That's probably the only time I can get to him. Tomorrow night. He can do it from his van. It'll be faster. Feeling like an idiot, I was convinced that she was tired. She snuggled up to me and immediately fell asleep. I waited an hour until she turned over, slipped out of bed, carefully took her phone off the charger, and walked out the patio door. I was a little shocked that he was sitting there in the shadows. He didn't even go back to the van. He plugged his phone into his laptop and worked at the patio table. Almost immediately, he quietly said, "Damn." What? She has anti-burglary encryption installed. Quite complex. Can you get me her laptop? I carefully crept back into the house to get my laptop. He took it into the van, hooked up a couple of cables, and worked like crazy before leaning back and sighing. Done. I caught him and reprogrammed him so he'll never show up again. I need your phone. I handed him my phone, and he did a few things before handing it back to me. You have a tracking app and remote viewing software installed. What does it mean? This means you need another phone. Someone cloned yours, and that's all you are texting. Everything you say, every business transaction you do over the phone is communicated to someone else. Crap. This could be really bad. I conduct most of my business via phone. Don't touch yours and try to limit confidential conversations. Use it enough so as not to arouse suspicion. I'll have a new phone for you tomorrow afternoon that will be as secure as possible. By then, I should be able to tell who's receiving your information. What should I do now? He shrugged. Put things back the way they were and go back to bed. Try to sleep. If you can, don't change your usual habits. If she wants to snuggle, snuggle. If she wants to play, play. If she ignores you, don't get aggressive. Just go for it. Remember, we don't know what we're dealing with yet. She may be involved in something shady. but she can remain loyal to you. We need to find out the players and understand what the game is. If I don't finish tomorrow, I'll finish the next day. Don't call us. We'll call you ourselves. You're still a shareholder, and it won't be unusual. We can tell you that you need to. Come look at some tables and discuss the idea of expansion. Surprisingly, I slept like the dead. I didn't succeed in business by hesitating. If I found a problem with something I was investing in, I confronted it head on. I was sad to think that the most important investment in my life was about to be worthless. They called 2 days later. Jimmy heard me answer the phone and asked what I was talking about. Major wants me to come and talk about expansion. She grinned. Let me guess, he found a new way to peek through windows to get details. I smiled and looked at her as I answered. Nobody does that anymore unless the client wants live pictures. Almost everything is done via computer and social media now. Most agencies worth hiring have one or two who can break through security codes and firewalls faster than a squirrel can crack a nut. No, Major doesn't need help in that area. He wants me to consider adding a personal security department. You know, bodyguards, escorts when it's not safe for a man or woman to be outside, extra security for the club. If there are a lot of famous people present, this kind of thing can be very lucrative. They have everything ready for the presentation, and knowing Jason, there will most likely be a PowerPoint presentation. Would you like to go? She winced. No, that sounds really boring. Besides, I have a guild meeting. I'll probably be late. I surprised her with my answer. Haven't you been late lately? I won't wait. What? I left the house before she could continue. The Major met me at the door, and he didn't smile. Jason put on his headphones, and when he looked up and saw me, he handed me a pair. The first thing I heard was a voice Jimmy. No fun and games tonight, guys. Roy is a little annoyed about the time I'm spending here. I can only justify it to a point. A male voice, later identified as Jack, began to whine. Damn, I was hoping for some fun tonight. I still remembered Philip's voice when he spoke. Calm down, Jack. We can wait. We're almost there. When we get there, we'll all disappear to the Cayman Islands for a very nice life. Jason turned off his headphones. I cloned her phone and had full access. Every time she speaks, in person or on the phone, it is recorded. He grimaced. She talks a lot. I had to set a filter so it would only activate after keywords. Then she revealed some of their plans, and I had to take it down. Now we have to listen to every word. My ears hurt. Let Major continue. I knew the man wouldn't sugarcoat it, and he was right. She's sleeping with both of these guys, at least one other guy and 2 women. We have names and bios of all of them except the last male lover, but we'll know that by tomorrow. I was stunned. How? Why? I thought she loved me. She loved me. I think she still does, just a little. From what I understand, she doesn't want to ruin you, but she wants all your cash, including the trust fund you set up in case of divorce. Here you go. There were now $300,000 there, plus about $40,000 in our account. My investment capital was just over $600,000, so if she got everything, it would be almost $1 million. $1 million is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's something that won't last her a lifetime. I told this to Major. It looks like you influenced her. She wants to invest money in a donut franchise. She intercepted a call from the owner who wanted you to invest and checked it out. She even visited him under the guise of an advertising agent and your wife. Her and her lovers seem to think this place might be a gold mine. She's ruining our lives for donuts. Seriously, why? Jason joined the conversation. Her lovers seem to have convinced her that you're having an affair. With whom? With Celeste Richards, Jody Hathaway, and Amy Rogers. They even say you all have sex together. I sighed. Damn, I'm a busy little beaver. I haven't slept with Celeste or talked to her other than on the phone in 5 weeks. Jody is a woman lover. She's not sexually attracted to men, And Amy is an ex-man and an accountant in the club I invested in. And before you ask, I'm not inclined to be in that kind of relationship. What should I do now? Major smiled, a smile that probably terrified anyone he interrogated. Now we're getting hard evidence. The conversations we recorded are illegal and can never be used, but we can use them to track their movements and be there when they meet. Then we'll take photos and audio recordings and your marriage contract will be complied with. I don't think it will take long. You need to leave for a couple of days soon. We also need to install audio and video recorders in your house. I don't think they are stupid enough to do this at your place, but you never know. Tomorrow is Thursday. You can do this while she's at work. I'll tell her tonight that I have to leave on Friday and may not be back until Sunday. She already has a motive. It'll just give her an opportunity. I am back. What else could I do? Luckily, I was home long enough to take a sleep pill that I sometimes used when traveling, and I was practically passed out when it came home. Jimmy climbed into bed, but gave up pretty quickly when I didn't react. I lay there wondering how many more nights we would spend together as husband and wife. I told her I would leave around noon to head to Cleveland. What the hell is in Cleveland? A security service that is losing money due to poor management. Major is coming with me to evaluate the personnel. We should be done with interviews by tomorrow, but it may take until Sunday. There was a little irritation in her voice. And you're just telling me about this now? I shrugged. I didn't know about this until last night. It was brought up in a meeting. It could be very lucrative, and it's only 2 days. You know what? Let's plan a vacation for next week. Somewhere warm, with sand, and alone. I heard that the Cayman Islands are nice now, and we haven't been there yet. I feel like we're growing apart, and I want to make sure you know how much I love you. She winced at the mention of the Cayman Islands, but quickly recovered. Jimmy perhaps became a better player than I knew or was genuinely touched. There were tears in her eyes when she kissed me. I'd love to, honey. Let's go to that hotel in Belize. Maybe we can get the same bungalow and just forget about the world for a few days. Looking her in the eye, knowing it would never happen, and lying about it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. After she left, I packed my things for Cleveland. Major, Jim, met me at the airport. He was already planning the trip, pending my agreement, so I actually went to Cleveland. We arrived and quickly finished things off, contracting 3 men and 1 woman for a year. They didn't even have to move if they liked Cleveland. We could just email them the details and they could come at the appointed time and place. When we arrived at the hotel, Jim smiled. Leave your phone in the hotel room. You won't stay, but your phone will make it look like you're here if anyone checks. One of the new operatives will come around 7 and take it with him while he has dinner at a very nice restaurant at our expense. Then he will wander around the city center aimlessly for an hour before returning it to your room. If she calls, it will automatically be forwarded to your new phone and she will never know. I winced, glad he was on my side. We found ourselves in a very pleasant country resort. When we went down for dinner, I was shocked to see Celeste, Jody, Bob, and Jan from the ad agency, Rick from the production company, and Chef Jean at the table. Almost everyone I was involved with through business was at the table. I looked at Major. We are all connected to you through business, but more importantly through friendship. This is a show of solidarity, Roy. You don't just invest in businesses, son. Your strength is your ability to invest in people. We are all with you, no matter what. You decide to do it. I was touched. Before I started getting into business, I was a fairly introverted person without many friends. I could look back at that table and know that even though we were related to each other through business, they were here as my friends. Celeste held one hand tightly and Jody the other. After a few minutes, Jody cleared her throat. What do you need us to do? Well, I'd definitely appreciate a few empty shoulders to cry on later. As for the rest, Jim is in control. Everyone looked at him. They are planning a big party after the play tomorrow, according to the intercepted conversations. They don't know it, but there will be a little more spectators than usual. We will mingle with the visitors after the play. Anything they say there can be used because it is a public place, and they have no right to privacy there. We already know where they are going, and we have it under control. Legally, we cannot install anything in the suite that they will use, but there are many listening devices that can record through. Also, if, say, a curtain breaks and doesn't close completely, and one of us is in a position where he can see through it, then it is perfectly legal to watch and film the entire group from the beginning of the play to the end. Their evening, there is no doubt that this will be enough for Roy to get a faulty divorce and maintain the terms of the marriage contract. He sighed. There will be collateral damage. The other man and both women are married, and not to either party. Tell us, Roy, how bad do you want it to be? Do you want her to go quietly, or do you want to burn her and her friends? Either option works for me. Oh, and I made an appointment with, in my opinion, the best divorce lawyer in the state, on Monday morning at 10. She sent me a list of things you should bring. The most important thing is a copy of the prenuptial agreement. I had to think about it. Most of my friends didn't know because they never had a chance to see it. But when I was wrong, I could become a cruel and vindictive scoundrel. One of my first investment projects failed because my partner manipulated the money and deliberately bankrupted the business. I recovered and followed him for some time. Every time he had the opportunity to start something, something happened that set him back again. I did this for 4 years before I decided I had my share of meat. I was still thinking when Jody intervened. Don't hesitate, Roy. Be as determined as always. Put an end to this and move on. Jim added his opinion. That's right. You don't have to be secretive, Roy. Just let yourself go. His statement calmed the situation, and everyone smiled. The drinking began. I went to bed while they sang 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover at the top of their lungs. Some even guessed the words. The next morning, I was woken up by the phone ringing. Looks like my new ringtone is 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. I suspected Jason. Still, it made me smile. Hello. Jimmy seemed happy. Good morning, dear. How's Cleveland? It's actually much nicer than I thought it would be. Very clean, lots of parks and green spaces, and the people are friendly. But it's still Cleveland. I'll be glad to come home. And I'll be glad when you come back, dear. Well, good news. I was able to get an early morning flight. I'll probably be home by 8. This disrupted her plans a little. She'll have to cut down on her fun so she can be home when I arrive. I was hoping she would take a shower first. She was a little confused, but quickly recovered. That's great. Just a reminder, I have a performance tonight. I might be a little irritable in the morning. The performance started at 8 and would end before 10. Even with communication, she could have been home by 11:30, no problem. I couldn't resist a little barb. Well, don't get carried away. I know your special state after the performance. I promise to behave. I must be in bed by midnight. Yes, but with whom? This went through my head when I broke the connection. Jim came in smiling. Caught her. She wasn't alone last night. While talking to you, she was in bed with a woman and the missing man from the group. In your bed. He's one of the board members. A married board member. The woman is married to the Da in another county. Depending on how you want to play it, it can get very confusing quickly. Well, there was no need to wait. I decided to act immediately after the play during the communication. How much would it cost to have an attorney draft adultery divorce papers and file a claim to break the family bond for everyone involved? I know they won't be legally binding, but they will make a statement of intent. He looked surprised. God, once you make a decision, you don't hesitate. It will cost a pretty penny, but I can do it. Go ahead while I tell the group my plans. I called Celeste and Jody and met them for breakfast. Jody seemed a little shocked, but Celeste just smiled. Poor Jimmy. All this time and she still doesn't know who she was married to. This will destroy them all and probably the guild. I doubt they can recover from the second scandal. After the house of cards collapses, I will help them start again, but I will make sure they know this is the last time. Most of us flew home together, and by the time we landed, they had their own plan. Everyone gathered to be near me for moral support. Jim brought in several new bodyguards to make sure everything was as civilized as possible. I hung out at the agency, listening to telephone conversations. Jimmy seemed to change her mind at the last minute. I think I'll skip tonight. Roy's coming home early, and I can't let him suspect anything. We're too close to the end to mess it up. This prompted a series of calls between the conspirators. Most wanted her to come. The Dawes wife persuaded her not to go. "You're showing common sense, dear. There's no need to ruin our game. We'll have plenty of time later." Then she laughed. "Besides, it will be more for me and Janice. Good luck tonight." None of the group knew about her plans except Philip and Jack. I was going to burn them anyway. He who pays plays. Jason walked over, smiling. "Found your hacker. Turns out your friend Philip has a degree in computer science and works for an IT company. Once this gets out, he'll probably be out of a job. Want to have some fun." Jason spent an hour hacking all of Philip's accounts. He even included a conversation about him and Jack being lovers, carefully removing any mention of Jimmy to his Facebook page, declaring his love for Jack to be undeniable and that they will be soulmates forever. It turns out he wasn't as good as he thought because Jason followed his electronic trail and recovered every cent they had taken so far. He'll be screwed when this comes out. I wish I could see his face when I tell him I got all my money back. I just smiled. Come to the play. You'll be able to see his face when I tell him about it. The show is about to begin, I thought as I sat in the van that night. We waited until the last minute to enter, waiting for the lights to come on and the curtain to rise. I was a little surprised when I saw who my witness for this evening was. It was Anne, Philip's ex-wife. I didn't recognize her right away, and she had to remind me who she was. She had lost 50 pounds, and her hair was now blonde and went down to the middle of her back. It turns out that while she was married to that bastard, she was ending her MMA career. Her fighting name was Catherine the Great due to her size. She fought in the heavyweight division and, although she was never a champion, made some good money before retiring. Unfortunately, Philip stole a lot of money from her before she discovered it. This was right after the confrontation, and she decided that if he might be cheating in the marriage, it might be worth checking to see if he was involved in something else. She caught him just in time to keep just over half of her assets. This was the main reason why she did not have to pay him child support. It looks like he took his share of the assets in advance. Anne was a strikingly attractive woman, much more attractive than I remembered. Then again, all I saw of her was her body as she slammed into me. I still remembered how her fist felt. While we were talking, I learned that she had 3 black belts in different styles of martial arts and was proficient in 2 more. She had a degree in criminal justice and worked as a police officer until she grew tired of the politics and harassment. She had been freelancing as a bodyguard until now and was happy to work with Jim, telling me she wouldn't mind a full-time job. It occurred to me that all of my investments and the friends I had made over the years were inadvertently preparing me for this situation. It wasn't something I was thinking about when I said yes. I remembered Jody's joke about my luck and smiled. Maybe she was right. 5 minutes before the curtain rose, I led Anne out of the van, glancing briefly at her 4-inch heels. "How can you fight in these?" She smiled. "I don't wear anything with a strap. These stilettos come off easily, and I can get rid of them in a second. Sometimes, if I'm not in a hurry, I leave them on. You'd be surprised how a 4-inch heel can take out a fighter out of service." Good to know. Her heels meant she was 3 inches taller than me, but that didn't bother me. I doubted that anyone would notice me next to her, and she laughed. "I'm usually dressed business casual. It's nice to dress up sometimes. You seem to like it too." I told her that I completely approved of her outfit, practically eye to eye with her cleavage. Her little black dress was what she called a high-low dress, high on the hip and low on the chest. It got my vote. This got the vote of everyone else who noticed us when we sneaked into their seats on the balcony. I looked around while the play was going on. It was decided by my friends to give it their all, every man in a tuxedo, every woman dressed up to nines, as they put it. Jim was with his wife, and at 45, she still had a killer body, and her silver hair seemed to glow. Jason was with his new bride, his little nerd, as he liked to call her. She was wearing a very cute dress. The purple color of the dress matched her hair perfectly. Celeste and Jody accompanied each other. If Jody had her way, it would have been a full-fledged date. I think this is the first time I've seen her in a dress. The dress was designed to highlight her strong body as much as possible. Celeste was, as always, stunning. We entered as the curtain rose and sat on the balcony. Bosses Jimmy, they didn't show up at the agency at my request. They were quite surprised when I asked them not to fire her. She didn't steal from you. I'm sure she's doing a good job, so I'd like you to keep her at least until the divorce is over. It would be hard for her to ask for support when she has a well-paying job. They agreed that it works well. One wanted to fire her on general principles, but the other, more cold-blooded partner, persuaded him not to do this. It all depended on how much publicity and consequences it would cause. The performance was quite good, a smaller version of My Fair Lady. I looked at Jimmy on stage, and she seemed radiant. It hurt me to see how happy she looked. I wondered what her expression would be like in about 90 minutes. Jack and Philip were the male presenters, and they received a lot of applause. The ovation lasted 15 minutes. They disappeared backstage before emerging into the foyer to receive the admiration of their fans. I arranged for 2 off-duty police officers to be present to make sure nothing got out of hand, and 3 bodyguards to act as bailiffs. Each carried a dozen red roses. Jimmy thanked the fan when she saw me, and she really seemed happy to see me. When I didn't come, she frowned and tried to make her way towards me. One of the bailiffs stopped her, saying that the roses were from a fan. "Your name is Jimmy McCoy, isn't it?" "Yes, it is." "Then this is for you too." She handed her a large brown envelope and took a photo of Jimmy holding him. "You have been served. Good night." She stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what was going on, glancing at me before opening the bag. There were several photos from last night where she cheated on me. Jimmy didn't say anything. She looked at me for a second, then her eyes rolled back and she fainted. When she fell, some photos were scattered and friends, trying to help her, saw them. Jack seemed to want to faint too when he received a photo of himself and his wife Jenny. Perhaps the $1 million I asked for in the alienation of feelings lawsuit helped his concerns. The Dawes wife, I still can't remember her name, was just rocking back and forth, saying, "No, no, no," over and over. Janice screamed and ran out of the building. A reaction Philip was the most interesting. In addition to the lawsuit papers, there was a note in the envelope telling him that the district attorney, the one whose wife he slept with, would receive a package detailing all of his illegal activities. He dropped the envelope and looked around like crazy before focusing on me. "I will kill you." He rushed towards me at full speed, but Anne stopped him. She smiled in his face. "Hello, dear. Did you miss me?" Then she hit him. It was a little over the top, but our lawyer convinced the court that it was just the adrenaline of the moment, and she thought he made a threatening move towards her client. The police arrived. The ambulance arrived. It was like déjà vu, but this time it was the last time. On the advice of my lawyer, I made myself unavailable for a few days, long enough to file the actual paperwork. I never returned to the house. I bought it for Jimmy and didn't want him anymore. I ended up giving her $50,000, the exact amount I added to the infidelity fund while we were married. I also gave her the house, but she also received the last 10 years of payments. I also gave her a car because I bought it for her birthday last year. In total, she received about $175,000 assets. A good amount, but small compared to what she lost. I had a hard time understanding why she would try to rob a bank when she already had the combination safe. She just needed to stay true. Of course, she tried to justify all this. I didn't buy anything from her. In one of our few conversations, I asked why she believed every lie, why she never checked whether it was true. She had the money to hire a private detective or, God forbid, to talk to me. She didn't have a definite answer. A week before the divorce, she gave in and signed the papers. She was still retained at the agency, but the cordial working relationship had faded, and it was obvious that she would never rise above the position she had at the time this all happened. Not surprisingly, she resigned and took a position in another city. It was over a year before I even started looking at other women. It took me so long to come to my senses. All my friends and business partners remained close, especially Celeste and Jody. After 6 months, they decided I would be fine and left me alone. I was still waking up, reaching out across the bed, Tajimi. It takes a long time for years of love to fade into the past. This whole story made me a little nervous, so I reduced my investments for a while, consolidating cash flow. This would put me in a better position if something profitable came along. I made one more investment before cutting back. The guy who contacted me about the donut franchise called to see if there had been any progress. He was destroyed when I gave him the short version of what happened. His response was to express to me sending 8 different flavors of his donuts, 3 dozen of each, to my office. They were stacked in front of the door when I arrived. I gathered as many people as I could for a tasting, and everyone agreed they were the best they had ever tasted. Even Jody tried to steal a dozen when she left. My favorite was the molasses donut. It had to have instant artery-clogging properties and contain at least 2 million calories. The guy was from Louisiana, so I flew there to check out his surgery. He had one store in a small town, and it took me 40 minutes to get inside because of the customers. I bought a donut and a surprisingly good cup of coffee, another Louisiana product, heavily mixed with chicory. When the line thinned a bit, I introduced myself. The stall manager turned out to be his daughter, and she shouted back, "Dad, Money Man is here." The guy jumped out from behind the counter, covered in sweat, with count paper cap on his head. He was about 5 feet 3 inches in any direction you could measure. A Cajun from a small parish that no one had heard of, his speech was difficult to understand, but he glowed with enthusiasm and was impossible not to like. I tried to talk about business, but he stopped me. "I make donuts. My daughter handles the business side. She thinks we could go statewide, maybe 4 or 5 more stores. You should talk to her. If she says okay, we'll go into business. We need to get back to work." I made an appointment for 6 o'clock that evening, helped myself to another molasses donut, and left. The meeting took place at her home. She treated me to genuine Cajun dinner. Most of the dishes were really tasty, except for the extreme spiciness. Her husband, who had returned from work on an oil rig, was at dinner. They had 3 children ranging in age from 3 to 13, all girls. After cleaning, we all drank coffee together, to which I had already sat down, and discussed business. The first thing I wanted to know was how he came up with the recipes and what made them so delicious. Dad makes his flavors, starting with vanilla. He makes most of them in 50 food-grade canisters, and they need to sit for at least a year. If we start working together, we'll have to find a place to produce in larger volumes. This can be a problem at the start. We have enough inventory to service 3 stores for a year besides ours right now. How much did you mean? She almost fainted when I told her. 3 stores is good for a test market, but you don't realize how original your donuts taste. My vision is to have one in every city in the state with over 20,000 people. I thought we could expand to Texas, Alabama, Georgia until we cover the South. I expect that within 10 years we can be all over the country, maybe even in international markets in select locations. How does that sound to you? It sounds too big. I'm not sure my father will agree, but we can talk to him and see. It took a month to convince him to agree to my proposal. Since I took on the financial burden, I received the lion's share of the profits. He finally agreed when I said I would include a buyout clause in the contract, 5% per year until he owned it outright. The initial agreement was 70-30, and I excluded his original store. He retained full ownership of the store. It was then difficult to get him to focus on producing enough flavors to support the stores. I had to bring in experts to explain how it works and that we need to legally protect the recipes to prevent copycats. I included a clause in the contract that in the future we would consider bottling and selling flavors as a secondary business. 8 months after signing the contract, we opened a store in New Orleans. When the locals found out how good they were, they tried to keep it a secret, but the advertising agency put a stop to it. They soon became so busy that we had to add a second location just to make donuts. We then opened in Shreveport and Baton Rouge. Rumors spread, especially when a Food Network star did a show about them. Celeste made a statement at the beginning of the show saying that she was a personal friend, and although I owned the majority of the shares, I had little to do with making the donuts. Gaston was a big fan and couldn't believe she was making a show about his small business. We ran the flavoring factory with 3 shifts, and they could barely keep up. Gaston insisted that they be aged for a minimum of 6 months, and if they did not pass his personal test, they had to be left in barrels. After we established ourselves, I hired respected general director and appointed Gaston's daughter as his deputy. He came out of retirement to train her, and once he felt she was comfortable enough, he came out of retirement with a significantly larger pension fund. Then I just relaxed. Oh, I continued to monitor my investments, attended meetings, but everything was going smoothly, so I wasn't worried. I was checking out the bar. The terrible trinity, Amy, Desiree, and Tina, wanted a meeting. Amy laid it all out for me. This place is a gold mine for you. We think it's time for you to expand. Other cities could benefit from what we've accomplished here. Our community is hungry for places where we can feel safe. We've done some research and found a good location. The location is great. It's a low-crime area with a progressive population, so we think we'll be accepted with minimal protests. Would you consider it? We did it. Jody decided not to participate except as a limited investor. I wasn't particularly interested in this either, so I laid out the terms for them. I'll invest 30%, Jody will invest another 20%. You'll have to find the rest yourself. We can't find that kind of money. No, but you can borrow them. We don't have credit for this. I smiled. You have it. I'll give you a loan. I'll keep the payments low, and the interest rate will be the key rate plus 1%. You can come to me for help, but it will be your business. When the tears and hugs were over, I took the documents out of my briefcase and handed them to Amy. Read them, and then have the lawyer do a double check. Sign them, and you're in business. The contract had a buyout clause, 5% per year until they became full owners. I was getting ready to leave, and it was just me and Tina left in the office. Roy, can I ask you a favor? What favor? We're having a prom next month. It's for all our people who, for obvious reasons, never got to attend one in school. It turned into a big event. We had to rent the local college gym, and we're already filling it up to capacity. Well, almost. 1 set of tickets left. And we want you to go with Amy. She's in love with you at first sight. Her boyfriend just left her for a real girl. He said some pretty hurtful things to her when he left. She was really looking forward to this prom, and now she's not want to go. Tina, Stop, listen. We know you're attracted to girls like us. If you were attracted, we would strangle you. But you love Amy as a friend, and many friends go to events together. Give her a good memory. I thought about this last night before going to bed. The next morning, I surprised Amy by showing up at her office. She left the table. Roy, is something wrong at the club? I took her hand. No problem. Miss Amy, would you mind if I was your date to prom? I think I look good in a tuxedo, and I'm sure you'll be beautiful, so... She turned pale, and I thought she might faint, but she quickly came to her senses. She had the door open, and all 6 of her employees could hear us. Oh, this is so unexpected. Let me think. Yes. She threw her arms around my neck, and I felt tears on her cheek. I let her hold me for a long time before she let me go. I'm expecting a great dinner and a really nice boutonniere. Acknowledged. See you later. I think her entire team stormed into her office as soon as I left. I had a feeling this was going to be an unproductive day. I arrived in a limousine at the appointed time, the boutonniere in my hands. She was absolutely gorgeous. Shiny blonde hair styled in an intricate braid, a strapless black dress that seemed to be molded onto her, with a high slit on her right thigh. I caught a glimpse of black garters as I helped her into the limousine. We attracted attention when we entered the most expensive restaurant in town. The men looked with open lust, and the women with admiration. After a great but light dinner, we arrived at the venue. The scenery was perfect, and the food was top-notch. We took a table with Desiree and her new husband, Tina and her boyfriend, and, surprisingly, Celeste and Aaron, one of the first people we met at the bar for the first time. We took photos, first as couples, then as a group, and finally individually. The highlight was when Amy and I were voted prom king and queen. We shared a dance under the spotlights, and she cried throughout the song. When it was over, she stepped back and looked me in the eyes. "I love you." She saw the worry on my face. "Not like that. Maybe so, though. If you loved girls like I do, I'd already be wearing your ring before you knew what happened. No, I love you because you were a friend, the friend I needed when I needed it most, the friend who believes in me enough to give me money for a business, and for making me believe it's okay to be myself." I kissed her. Bet she didn't expect this. When we parted, I smiled. "If I loved girls like you would be my choice." I noticed a guy watching us like a hawk with a hungry look in his eyes. Shy to the point of pain, he plucked up his courage and walked over to ask Amy for a dance. I told him to ask the lady, and she surprised him by agreeing. We watched them on the dance floor. This is Robbie. He's still trying to find himself, trying to come to terms with the fact that he likes girls like us. He has a big crush on Amy, but he's deathly afraid of doing anything. It looks like he's finally found the courage. They did 2 more dances, and I saw them take out their phones. The evening ended on a positive note. Many will remember it as the best evening of their lives. Robbie came up and hesitantly invited me to the after party. Everyone was going to go, but I refused. "I'm leaving pretty early in the morning. I don't mind if Amy goes, as long as she has someone to look after her. Can you do that for her, Robbie? You know, if anything happens to her, I'll be looking for you." He stuttered, assuring me of his intentions as I looked at Amy. "You are sure? Remember, we came as friends. Go have fun. I hope to hear only good news about how the rest of the evening went." She threw herself into my arms and hugged me tightly before clinging to Robbie's hand. Celeste surprised me by asking me for a ride. Her boyfriend went to another party. We got into the limousine. If the driver noticed that I left with another woman, not the one I arrived with, he did not show it. "Where are you staying?" "With you. I didn't make any reservations. I was going to stay with Desiree and her husband." "Well, apparently you're stuck with me." "Could be worse," she answered, crawling under my arm. I kissed her cheek, and she sighed. We were naked and in bed within minutes. It was one of the best nights of my life. I woke up to find her sitting on the sofa in the room, drinking coffee from room service. She was only wearing one of my shirts. She looked unsure, but I kissed her and she relaxed. "You must have coffee for me too." She smiled and poured me a cup from a jug I hadn't noticed before. We sat in comfortable silence until our cups were empty. Then the questions began. "What happened last night?" She grinned. "Fate." "How do you feel?" When she stopped laughing, she told me that I had spent too much time with the wrong girls. "My feelings, dear, are that we get along well together. I have no qualms in telling you that I've wanted you for years. I've also seen the way you look at me when you think I'm not looking. Admit it, we have good chemistry. I don't want to ruin our friendship." "To hell with friendship. I'm looking for something deeper, and we both know it. I'm not getting any younger anymore, and my window is closing. I want 2 children, 3, if the first 2 are of the same sex. Then I'll finish. You need to think about it. I don't need an answer right now. We need to get used to each other. Last night was a good start, and I expect there will be at least one more time before I have to fly. It sounded better than talking, so I did it. The courtship lasted 4 months. I didn't do much at the time except watch the money roll in. She continued to star in the show and tour in support of her book. I accompanied her several times until I learned that when Celeste works, she really works. She spent 5 hours signing books and taking photos, refusing to leave until the last book was closed and everyone was happy. She introduced me as her partner several times. I knew she meant business partner, or at least that's what I thought, but everyone just assumed we were life partners. Small displays of personal affection may have changed their perceptions a little. We had sex. A lot of. We made love. A lot of. We did everything we could think of, and by we, I mean her. Most of it was quite enjoyable. Some things I wouldn't even try. We talked a lot about our past. Her background was much more varied than mine. We spent about an hour discussing her days. I'm sure you know it was 90% Jack, but he's convincing, and after a while, I started to enjoy it. However, deep down, I always knew that as soon as I let another man touch me, the clock we'd never last. It may sound fun and playful, but it can be a pretty lonely life. She took a deep breath. Still, bygones are bygones. Relationships after Jack have always been monogamous. Then she pressed herself against me. I don't promise you this, I guarantee it. If we end up together forever, it will be just like this forever. No others. Till death do us part, and I mean it. I still hesitated. I was pretty sure I'd always had a little crush on Celeste. Her past scared me a little, and sometimes when we were together, I wondered if she was thinking about past lovers. I've never had such a problem. If I was with a woman, I would be completely immersed in the present. I tried to give my partner everything she wanted. True, sometimes in strange moments, I remembered what we did and thought about how I did the same thing with someone else, and how it was always better with her. My hesitation began to put pressure on our relationship. She dropped a lot of hints the last time we were together, and I didn't respond as well as I could have. She left suddenly, and I didn't see her for 2 weeks. Then one night, I saw headlights coming up my driveway. I bought several acres near a lake that I liked so much. Couldn't get to the shoreline, but I secured access to the lake. I had a motorboat that I rarely used, preferring to get out on the water in the quiet of the early morning in my kayak. I would get a good run of paddling and get out of the lake before the big boats made it too rough. My home was a cedar ranch style with 4 bedrooms and many amenities, including a pool and hot tub. I was ready to step into the hot tub, so I put on my robe and went out to see who had arrived. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it was Celeste, and then I realized there was someone else with her. It was Anne. Celeste took her as a security guard on book tours several times because she had a stalker. They became friends and became friends. Celeste had been drinking, it was obvious. Anne simply smiled and said that they happened to be nearby and decided to stop by. Celeste laughed when she saw my robe and realized that I was naked underneath. Yay, bath. Come on, Annie. She began to undress as she walked, and I followed her, picking up her clothes. She slowly slid her gorgeous body into the tub, sighing. Oh, this feels so good. Come on, guys. I turned to apologize to Anne, and my jaw dropped. Anne was undressing as quickly as Celeste, but she was behind me, and I didn't notice. As she walked past, she grabbed my hand and practically dragged me into the bath. I didn't have time to take off the robe, and soon it began to feel like a weight, so I stood up and threw it off. Celeste stopped laughing. She looked me straight in the eyes. This is my last attempt to make you commit. Since you didn't commit to me, I'm still free. That's it. If you commit, it will be my last time with a woman. If not, it will be my last time with you. Either way. Otherwise, I want us to have a good time. Stop thinking and start loving. I thought about it for, well, about 2 seconds. Celeste was right. We haven't officially declared ourselves exclusive. If we wanted to have fun with someone else, we were all free to do so and wouldn't hurt anyone. I have to admit, the next day I was so exhausted I could barely move. I woke up, Anne stood at the foot of the bed, dressed and washed. "Thank you, Roy. I always wondered what it would be like to be in bed with you and Celeste, and now I know." She smiled thoughtfully. "That was her last outburst, Roy. If you can't commit or if you don't love her, let her go. She has such a hot and loving personality that she will quickly find someone else." I stood up, forgetting that I was naked, and left the bed without Celeste waking up. I looked at myself and grinned. Nothing that Anne had not already seen up close. "Just a second, I'll be right back." I went to my safe, entered the combination, and took out a small box. I opened it, and Anne's eyes widened. "Celeste, dear, wake up and say goodbye to Anne." She grumbled as she opened one eye. I hoped the ring looked huge, so close to her face. "I have made a decision, dear. If you agree, I would like to." She rushed at me so quickly that we fell to the floor in a tangle of blankets, while Anne took pictures of us with her phone. She immediately posted decent photos, and within 30 minutes, the phones were ringing. I was looking through wedding cards and found one without a name. "I always knew you and Celeste would end up together. I hope she makes you happy. Best wishes, Jimmy." Jimmy disappeared for a while after leaving the agency. One day she returned with a new man. Their relationship lasted about 6 months. She disappeared again, and when she returned, she started her own agency. Her former bosses handed her small tasks, and she assigned them to projects that required more resources than she could provide. She married a guy she met while working on his campaign, and after a year of dating, they got married. I gave them a wedding gift: 1% ownership of a donut franchise. This may not sound like much, but it was a nice addition to my annual income. She found it was my most profitable project, and I felt some guilt for taking it from her. They now have a little girl. Jack simply disappeared after being accused of ruining someone else's relationship, and even Anne doesn't know where he is. She could find out if she wanted to, she just never had a reason to. Philip got into a worse situation. I didn't press charges because I would have to blame Anjami. She was never an organizer, just a gullible and insecure woman. They only managed to steal about 20,000, and I gave it all back. I sent his bosses a detailed report on how he used company computers and resources for illegal activities, and he was fired instantly, making the reason for his dismissal public knowledge. Not a single reputable company wanted to touch it. He went into the dark web for a while, hijacking unsecured computers and ransoming them until he made a mistake and hacked into a famous writer's computer. This writer's publisher put all their resources into finding him, and when they found him, they turned him over to the feds. He received 7 years and was a month away from parole when he got into an altercation with another inmate. He had to serve the entire sentence, plus 18 months. I wondered from time to time how he managed in prison with his slight figure and handsome face. I think he threw himself into whatever role was asked of him. Celeste saw me with a card and asked who it was from. I threw it in the trash. "An old business acquaintance. You smile that I know something you don't know, smile. What happened?" "I'm 10 days late. Tomorrow I'll buy a pregnancy test at home." "Well, good for us." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.